discussion of ecology, I would like to talk about interspecific relationships today. We've already looked at what ecology is and what a population is. And to remind you what a population is a group of organisms that occur in the same general local area. And the key here is that those organisms are of the same species. So a species of rabbit would be a population in your backyard, basically. But I'd like to talk about interactions between different species, and that's interspecific competition. So the three that I would like to talk about today are competition, predation, and symbiosis. When we talk about interspecific interactions, what we're really talking about are things that affect the survival and reproduction of each of the species or all of the species in a community. And these effects can either be negative or positive or neutral. First thing I'd like to talk about is competition. And there is a definition of species that states that two species competing for the same limited resources cannot coexist permanently in the same place at the same time. So in order to get around that, in order to divide up the limited resources that are in an area, species will do what's called resource partitioning. And resource partitioning takes those limited resources and divides them up just enough so that the niches are not exactly overlapping, so they are able to coexist. When we talk about ecological niche, we're talking about the specific set of abiotic and biotic factors that an organism uses in order to survive. And we can think of an ecological niche as what an organism does, but also where it lives. So its job and its home, basically. There is this concept of a fundamental niche and a realized niche. A fundamental niche is the niche that a species could occupy if there wasn't any competition around. So the biggest, best niche if nobody else was in competition for the resources. And that might be space, it might be food, it might be breeding sites. And a realized niche is the niche that actually exists. So with the two populations existing together, what is the niche that is, in reality? So if you look at, there are two species of barnacles that exist in tide pools. And one of them is thalamus, and it generally will exist at the higher tide level. And the other one is balamus, and it will exist lower in the tide pools. But if you remove the ones that exist lower in the tide pools, the balamus ones, then the other species actually will fill that niche. So they will spread out from that upper tide line down lower and take over the spot that the other species used to exist. So it has a much larger fundamental niche than realized niche. Let's talk about predation now. Predation is when one organism kills another organism and eats it for food. Obviously, this is a positive benefit for the predator, but an obviously negative benefit for the prey. And predators have a wide range of adaptations in order to make them very good predators. So they may have very sharp teeth, claws, they may have speed, very acute senses like hearing, smell, sight. They might have stingers, they might have poison, they might utilize camouflage. So because of all of these adaptations that predators have, prey have come up with or have evolved adaptations that help them to avoid those predators. So they've gotten very good at avoiding all of those adaptations that the predators have in order to not become the predator's next meal. So some of the behavioral adaptations that prey have, hiding, so simply avoiding and hiding and not being seen by the predator, fleeing, so they also have speed to get away. They form herds or schools in order to, find that safety in numbers. And they also have active self-defense. So they may turn and fight, or they may have poison. They may sting. So some of the more interesting ones are cryptic coloration, or camouflage, simply. And so it makes it very difficult for the predator to see the prey because they totally blend into the environment. And there are some amazing examples of cryptic coloration. Some animals use very bright colors to indicate, hey, you better stay away from me. It's a warning. They may be poisonous. Great examples are snakes. Some are very brightly colored, and also poison frogs, beautiful coloration on poison frogs, and they are advertising that you don't want to mess with me. There's also mimicry, where some species will mimic other species and gain an advantage in that way. So, one type of mimicry is Batesian mimicry, and this is where a harmless species or a species that actually would taste good and is not toxic actually mimics a toxic species. Our local monarch butterfly is actually an example of a species that has a Batesian mimic. The monarch butterfly is actually toxic if eaten, and birds will vomit if they encounter or eat a monarch butterfly. But the mimic is actually the viceroy butterfly, and the viceroy butterfly is fine to eat, but because it looks very, very similar and birds can't distinguish between the two, they will actually avoid the viceroy butterflies because they think it's a monarch, and they, have already learned that to eat a monarch it makes them not feel well. It's a perfect example of Batesian mimicry where they would be fine if they ate it, but they can't tell them apart. So that offers the viceroy butterfly some protection because it's looking like the one that's toxic. Another type of mimicry is called Mullerian mimicry, and this is where two species that are toxic or poisonous or not palatable actually mimic each other. And so there's a sort of combined effect. And an example of this is the yellow jacket and the cuckoo bee. And they both have very similar coloration. They've got the same black and yellow stripes, and predators have learned that black and yellow means leave me alone. So although they are both not palatable and they're both toxic, they will avoid both species. They'll basically avoid anything that's yellow and black stripes. So that's Mullerian mimicry. Let's talk about parasitism. This is a type of symbiosis where two species uh, live in direct contact with one another. In terms of parasitism, there is a positive relationship for the parasite, but a negative one for the host. There are different kinds of parasites depending upon where they live. Endoparasites are found inside the organism. A good example of this are tapeworms that live inside the intestines. An outside parasite or an ectoparasite would be one that lives on the outside of the host body, like fleas and ticks on a dog. Another type of interaction is mutualism, and in this case, there is a positive benefit for both organisms that live closely together. One example are nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in the root nodules of some plants, and plants aren't able to take the nitrogen from the soil without it being fixed by the bacteria first. So the bacteria have a place to live, they have nutrients, and the plant has an advantage because it gains the nitrogen that the bacteria is basically making usable